What do we actually know about the most famous person in human history? He was born under extraordinary circumstances. His mother was a young Jewish woman engaged to be married. She said she had seen an angel who told her she would become pregnant with a child, and even told her what to name him. Her fiancé was furious. Then he had a dream involving the same angel. He accepted her, no questions. During the late stage of her pregnancy, the Roman government ordered a census requiring people to return to their family towns to be registered. So they traveled to West Bank, Palestine, her husband's ancestral town, by road. By the time they arrived, she was already in labor. They couldn't find a proper place to stay, so they ended up in an animal shelter. The baby was placed in a feeding trough. Then the government came looking for him. The local king had heard that a child had been born who could threaten his throne. Soldiers were sent to kill him. The king had heard that a special child had been born, someone who, according to the reports reaching him, could one day threaten his rule. So the family fled and gained asylum in Egypt. They remained in exile as protected residents until the death of the king. Eventually, they returned and settled in a small village in the Middle East. The boy grew up in a small village in northern Israel. His father was a carpenter, so he learned the trade. For most of his early life, there was nothing particularly remarkable recorded about him, and for roughly the next 3 decades, there was very little to distinguish him from the people around him. Then, around the age of 30, he made his public debut, and suddenly, people started talking about him. He taught in their religious centers. At first, it was his teaching that got people's attention. He spoke with an authority that surprised people. Then came the reports. A man with a serious skin disease approached him. He reached out and touched the man. The disease disappeared. A blind man was brought to him. He touched the man's eyes. The man could see. Another man had been unable to walk. His friends carried him to this new teacher. He told the man to get up. The man stood. Then things got stranger. A violent storm hit a boat carrying him and his followers. While everyone else was panicking, he stood up and ordered the wind and waves to stop. It did. People began bringing him anyone they thought he could help. The sick, the disabled, people suffering from conditions nobody could explain. And one by one, they were leaving healed. But healing people wasn't the strangest thing about him. He also claimed authority over something no human being has ever been able to control: death. A young girl had died. He went to her. He took her by the hand, and she got up. Later, one of his close friends died. This time, there was no doubt. The man had been dead for 4 days. His body had already begun to decay. He went to the tomb. He called the dead man by name, and the man walked out. Crowds were following him everywhere. People were calling him the one they had been waiting for, and the authorities were starting to see him as a problem. The authorities were paying attention now, and they didn't like what they were seeing. This man wasn't just healing people. He was challenging the people who believed they were in charge. He openly criticized religious leaders who demanded respect, but didn't live by the standards they preached. He called out hypocrisy. He challenged their traditions. He told ordinary people that God cared about them, not just the powerful, educated, or religious. And then there was something even more dangerous. He spoke like he had authority that belonged to God himself. He spoke about God as his father in a way that shocked his audience. He even claimed that he had authority to judge people. To his followers, this was proof that he was something far greater than a teacher. To his opponents, it was becoming a serious problem. The crowds were growing. People were calling him the promised king, and the authorities had a reason to be nervous. The region was already under Roman occupation. Any movement gathering thousands of followers around someone being called a king could attract the attention of Rome. A rebellion could mean bloodshed, so the people in power had a choice: let this movement continue, or stop it before it became something they could no longer control. They chose to stop him. One of his closest followers betrayed him for money. He was arrested at night. His followers scattered. He was taken away and questioned. The charges against him were serious. He was accused of claiming to be a king. That was enough to put him in the hands of the Roman authorities. The Roman governor questioned him. He found no clear reason to execute him, but the pressure from the crowd and religious leadership kept building. Eventually, the governor gave the order. He was sentenced to death by execution. The same man who had spent the last few years healing the sick, feeding crowds, calming storms, and calling the dead back to life was now being led away to be killed. The execution chosen for him was one of the most brutal forms of punishment used by the Roman government. It was designed to be public, designed to hurt, and designed to send a message. He was beaten and then forced to carry the wooden beam of his own execution. At the execution site, his hands and feet were fastened to the wood with nails. Then, the cross was raised, and he was left hanging there in public. There was no quick death. Crucifixion could last for hours. The victim's body gradually became weaker from blood loss, dehydration, exhaustion, and the increasing difficulty of breathing. Eventually, the body could no longer keep going. He died there. The man who had attracted enormous crowds, who had healed people others could not help, who had commanded storms, who had called the dead back to life, was dead. His followers were devastated. His body was taken down and placed in a tomb. A large stone was placed across the entrance. For his followers, the story appeared to be over. Their teacher was dead. Their movement was finished. And then something happened that turned the entire story upside down. 3 days later, some of his followers went to the tomb. They expected to find his body. They didn't. The stone had been moved. The tomb was empty. At first, they didn't know what to make of it. Then they started seeing him. Not just one person, not just once. His followers reported meeting him alive again. They talked with him. They ate with him. They touched him. He showed them the wounds from his execution. And then he spent time with them, teaching them what they were supposed to do next. This wasn't the story they had expected. They had watched him die. They knew where his body had been placed. Now they were claiming that the same man was standing in front of them alive, and they weren't keeping the story to themselves. They went out and started telling everyone. The movement that should have ended with his execution instead exploded. His followers began traveling from city to city, telling people that their teacher had defeated death. They were beaten, arrested, threatened. Some were killed, yet they kept telling the same story. The man they had followed had died, and then, they insisted, he had come back to life. Within a few decades, the story had traveled far beyond the small region where it began. People across different parts of the ancient world were now following him, and this is where the story becomes even stranger. Because the man himself had never traveled very far. He had never commanded an army. He had never ruled a country. He had never written a book. He had never held political office. He lived for roughly 33 years. He spent only a few years in the public eye. And yet, more than 2,000 years later, billions of people still know his name. His name is Jesus. Jesus Christ, the man born in a small town in the Middle East, the carpenter who became a teacher, the man who healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, raised the dead, and commanded the storm. The man who was crucified, the man who returned to life on the third day, the man whose story spread from a small corner of the Middle East to the entire world. Jesus Christ, not a legend created for a story, a real man who lived in history, the very heart of Christianity. He is the Savior of the world. We have seen and testify that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. First, John 4:14. Do you believe in him?